Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm Steve Donovan, the Director of Alumni Relations at Trinity College. It's my pleasure to welcome you back, so to speak, for your reunion. While we so wish we could be doing this on the beautiful quad and in the beloved classrooms along the long walk, the world is just not quite ready for that. I promise you, we are very eager to bring alumni together again in person, both on campus and throughout the world, and it's our hope that that will begin this fall. Today, we're pleased that you have joined us virtually and hope you'll find the weekend's array of class-specific gatherings and college-offered presentations celebrating accomplished alumni enjoyable, informative, and inspirational. So many Trinity alumni remember certain faculty members so fondly. And in many cases, alumni continue to stay in touch with those faculty members years after they graduate. It is, in my opinion, one of Trinity's most endearing qualities. Today, we're delighted that a Trinity faculty member who ranks at the top of that list has agreed to lead a conversation with one of her prized pupils who has blazed a remarkable trail of her own. I've been fortunate to witness some of this particular relationship, and the mutual admiration is off the charts. So now it's my pleasure to turn the program over to Professor Adrian Rennie Falco, an associate professor at the college. Professor Falco teaches a broad range of courses in public policy, constitutional law, and the Supreme Court. She also directs the undergraduate public policy and law program and coordinates the legal studies minor at Trinity. She's a busy woman. She is beloved by her students, and today she gets to share some of that love back at one of her best students ever. Professor Falco will moderate a conversation, and then I'll come back a little while later and we'll take live audience questions. Feel free to use the Q&A button or the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen for questions. The chat function will be open too for you to make comments or with each other or with the audience or the panelists, but not to ask questions. We prefer those just come through the Q&A function if you can. So for now, I'll turn it over to Professor Falco. Thank you.
Steve, thank you so much. And I would like to thank you and Michelle for putting this terrific program together. It is wonderful. And I also would like to welcome everybody who's able to join us. I am thrilled to be moderating today's discussion with Lisa Banks. Lisa is a member of the class of 1990, which is celebrating its 30th reunion. She has built an illustrious career as a civil rights and employment attorney. And before we turn to her notable work on key legal issues of the day, I would like to share one anecdote with you, one story with you, about Lisa as a student. And this goes back to, I actually went back and double checked. I can still, Lisa, you're still in the system. So just thought I'd let you know. And I thought it was 1990. So I'm glad I have my facts right, especially with someone of Lisa's caliber as a lawyer. It was actually 1989. And Lisa took a course with me, Political Science 277, Law, Gender in the Supreme Court. And it was one of the first times I had actually taught the class. And it turns out that Lisa did an exceptional final paper for that class. And it was so good that I asked her to submit it to the Trinity papers. And she was reluctant. It was kind of, oh, no, it's not that good, you know, whatever. And I said, no, come on, I want you to do this. And it turns out that her paper not only was submitted, but was actually published in the Trinity papers. And I think all the alums here will know what that means. That's a real honor. And just to let you know how good I still think that paper is, I still assign it in that class. It is still one of the papers that I assign, and I do it for several reasons. It is a model of undergraduate student writing, and I think that's important. But I also want students to understand that sometimes you can do something as a student in college that really lives on. And so that is my little tribute to Lisa and her paper. And I think that's a good way to move to the next section. And so Lisa, let's jump right in to our conversation. And I am wondering if you would mind, or if you would be willing to say a few words about how you became interested in the law and your decision to go to law school.
Sure. And hi, Rennie. It's nice to be with you today. Well, I became interested in the law, honestly, because of you and because of the classes you taught and some of the other classes that I took at Trinity. Rex Neverson was one. He taught a constitutional law seminar that I thought was quite fascinating, and but mostly because of you, because of those classes that you were teaching, the class you just talked about. It really sparked an interest in me, and I think I naturally, just as a person, gravitated towards politics and civil rights issues. I just found them really interesting and integral to our history, and it's just very compelling. So the law was always interesting to me, and it was a focus of my studies, certainly at Trinity. Not necessarily law school. It wasn't always in the cards for me. I wasn't sure about that. I wasn't sure that I had the money or I wanted to spend the time to go to law school. And so initially I didn't. I worked for a couple of years. But ultimately I was working in the sports field, working for Reebok, and it was great fun for early 20-something person, but it really wasn't very intellectually stimulating. So eventually I moved west for personal reasons and ended up going to law school, and thought that would give me some more opportunities and some more options, and certainly it did. So that's sort of how I ended up in law school. It wasn't necessarily a given, and I could have just as easily maybe ended up doing policy work. But that's sort of how I landed in law school. But my love of the law and my interest in that area truly was sparked while I was at Trinity, and particularly with you.
Well, it's very kind of you to say that. And I do remember, I remember the story, and I remember a little bit about your reluctance initially, was this really for you, and the conversations we had. And I think your story is a good one, because I think it just reminds us that the path we take is not always the path we think we're going to take, and we develop many interests in college, and it's not always clear where we're going to wind up. So I think it's an important story. And maybe you could also say something about your early experience as a lawyer, once you've been to law school, and again, might be interesting to know how you settled on the particular area of the law you settled on. But how did your early experiences in particular prepare you for the legal work you do today?
Well, I think, as with anybody who goes to law school, you've got to figure out what are you going to do with that, because there are a million kinds of lawyers out there, and you can do all sorts of different things. And a lot of people think it's just big firm work. You graduate, you get a job at a big firm, you start billing your hours, and that's what you do. But there's a lot that you can do with a law degree. And so I knew that I wanted to do something in the public interest sphere. I knew that I didn't want to be a corporate lawyer. But really what happened is I was clerking for a judge in Colorado, and he happened to have a friend who was the general counsel of the EEOC, which is the United States Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. And so that's the agency that enforces all the civil rights statutes like Title VII, the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Equal Pay Act, things like that. He came out to talk to us about the work of the agency and what they were doing there. And for me, it was like lightning struck, because I thought, yes, that's what I want to do. That's a great area. So after the presentation, he asked, what I was going to do after my clerkship. And I said, I'm going to call you. And I did. I called him. And one thing led to another, and I got a job at the EEOC, and I moved to Washington, D.C. And I was working in their appellate division. So I think it was before I was even 30 years old. I was arguing Title VII cases at federal appeals courts all around the country, and it was fantastic. I got an expertise in that area of the law, knew my way around an appellate courtroom, and it was really intellectually stimulating and terrific work. So that's where I started this area of the law. Eventually, I wanted to have more of a connection with the clients, with the people who were impacted, because really what I wanted to be able to do was help people. So I left the EEOC and went to work at a small plaintiff side civil rights firm, which is where I met my eventual law partner, Debbie Katz. And we worked there, and I was doing what I was doing, interacting with people, working with the laws, trying to solve problems. And eventually Debbie and I spun off this firm, Katz, Marshall and Banks, in 2006, I think it was. And we put into place our vision of how we wanted to run a firm and how we wanted to impact the world around us. And we, worked hard and had some good fortune, and we've been really successful. And I think that that's attributable to the fact that we both are passionate about what we do. We work hard, and we found people to work with who are similarly committed and really smart. So that to some degree has led to our success. So that sort of brings us to where we are now, and we're fortunate that we can pick and choose some of the cases we do. And some of our cases have become a little more high profile and we've had more of an impact, but the focus really still is on helping people and helping our clients.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to follow up with one question. And I'm going to quote from your website, and you've alluded to some of this already, but I have one more specific question about it. This is what you say on the website. Quote, "Fighting for the underdog has always been important to me. Being a civil rights and employment attorney gives me the opportunity to do that every day, to fight for the underdog and to achieve vindication for hardworking employees and whistleblowers who have suffered discrimination, harassment, or retaliation in the workplace." End of quote. And so maybe you could just say a few words before we talk about your cases about why these particular areas of employment are so important today.
Well, today, well, if you look back at the history of civil rights and civil rights statutes, I think we can all see obviously that progress has been made. A lot of progress has been made. And I truly believe that, the arc of the moral universe does bend towards justice, but it also takes a lot of work and tending and constant attention, because it's just not going to happen naturally or without assistance. So we need to work at it in order to move us forward as a society. And I think as we move forward as a society, it takes a little bit longer for our institutions to catch up usually, and that's the case. And I think probably in the last 10 years or so, I think there have been tremendous strides in various areas, and we have moved forward as a society tremendously. But I do think that what you get when that happens is you get a backlash. And I think what we have seen over the last several years is a tremendous backlash. And so, I don't want to get political about it, but I do think that, the Trump administration was a reaction to having Obama as president, to the emergence of rights for the LGBT community come forward, and gay marriage, and all the ways in which I think this country started moving in a particular way more quickly. And so we have seen the backlash with a rise of white nationalism and a rise of anti-Semitism and other issues that we're facing as a country. And so it's more important than ever, I think, now to fight back against sexism and racism and anti-Semitism. And a lot of that manifests itself in the workplace. And so, what we're doing is holding employers to account. And it may be individual cases. It may just be one person who has endured harassment in her workplace, and we have to hold that employer accountable. It may be, and we'll talk about this later, it may be an entire sports league or a sports franchise. It may be a politician. It can be any number of institutions or people, but they all have to be held to account wherever we can do that. And so that's why I think what I'm doing is, it feels important anyway. I feel like at the end of the day, I'm trying to help people, and I'm trying to move the country in a way that I think is the right way and that's important for me.
Right. I think that's a great background for us as we now turn to some of the cases. Lisa and I agreed that I am going to allow her to talk about some of the cases that she thinks will be of interest to you. And so, Lisa, I'm going to turn it over to you now in terms of doing that. If you could just discuss a few cases with us, I think it would be terrific.
Sure. So, generally speaking, what my firm does is work in employment law and civil rights, which includes discrimination, harassment, retaliation. We also do whistleblower law, and we do Title IX law. So I'll touch on some of the cases in those areas. Our harassment work, which we have done for years and have been very successful at, and I enjoy that kind of work, has morphed into sort of a Me Too practice over the last number of years. And it started really in 2017 when the Harvey Weinstein allegations broke and the whole Me Too movement began. And we actually did represent a couple of people related to the Harvey Weinstein case. But it was soon after that we began our representation of Christine Blasey Ford. Mm-hmm. And we represented her in the Kavanaugh hearings in 2018. Excuse me. And that's really what sort of got that area of our practice off and running. And it's certainly what people seem to remember most recently. And and that representation was similar to, honestly, many representations we have, in that we had an individual who had goals, and we were there to service our client and to see if we could bring her towards her goals. And her goals at that time were to be able to bring information to the Senate Judiciary Committee so that they could make a truly informed decision as they decided whether they were going to put this man on the Supreme Court for life. So we worked towards that goal for her and tried to facilitate her ability to go and talk to the committee. It was similar to our other representations in that way. It was unlike our representations in other cases in that this one played out across national television. So all of our letters to Senator Grassley were, on CNN, before it had gotten through the scanner. We had to go on TV to bat back some of the rumors and accusations. And then we had to guide her through this hearing that was watched by the whole world. Although I'm not sure we knew exactly how big this was because we were in our little cocoon. So it wasn't your usual case in that regard, but we felt really good about the fact that we allowed her to step forward and to share what she needed to share that was important. And I think ultimately what happened there is she was able to give voice to millions of women across the country and the world, who then were able to speak out about their own instances of harassment or abuse. And so obviously that was a tremendous representation for us. We were proud to be able to do it and proud of the work we did there. Some of the other work we've done in this space more recently, I've been representing about 40 former employees of the Washington football team, which is formerly the Washington Redskins. And actually, I think I somehow have this subspecialty now in sports teams, but
takes you back to Reebok.
I guess so. It all comes full circle, right? Yeah. So I represent all of these former employees who have come forward to reveal basically 2 decades of harassment, misogyny, and abuse at this organization. Just horrific stuff. And there was some explosive reporting in the Washington Post about it. And after that, the NFL began a big investigation into the team and its owner. And so I've been working with these clients to help them participate in the investigation, to work with the press and getting their story out there so they know that the light is shown on that issue. And the goal of my clients there really was to affect change. Not all of them had live claims because some of them endured this stuff 10, 15 years ago. But they wanted to affect change and shine a light on what was going on, and they did that. And the team has effectively cleaned house and sworn to be committed to changes, and the NFL investigation is still going on. We don't know what's going to happen with the owner. That remains to be seen. But it's been a pretty big case that has resulted in some big changes, I think. And it has also, because it was in the media, got people talking about what is acceptable and what is not, even in the sports environment. I also represented a woman who accused Roberto Alomar, who's a Hall of Fame baseball player, of sexual misconduct. And after that investigation, he was put on the ineligible list, which is basically effectively bars him from working in the baseball industry any further. So that was another. Oh, and then I also represented a woman who accused Antonio Brown, who's a football player, who harassed her and then threatened her with text messages, her and her family. And the NFL did an investigation there and suspended him for half a season. So those are some sports cases that I've been working on in the Me Too area. So
really interesting though, sort of the public side of all of this, right? And because it makes me think, and I'll save this for the Q&A, but remind me, I had a question for you.
Okay. Well, and I do think,
because I do think it's interesting, kind of the whole public dimension to this and how that also changed. If you talk about change, it isn't only representing people quietly, but the fact that some of this then is public is really important.
Right. And a lot of our work now has become more public because that's the better way to affect change. And we still have plenty of clients who are, we represent them, it's quiet, it's confidential, we work on their behalf, we may or may not file a lawsuit, we may or may not settle. But some of these cases that become public are the ones that actually have an impact and force change because it's out there in the public eye and the public demands it.
Right.
And so we've had to learn pretty quickly to become media specialists and to work with PR firms and figure out how to manage that. But it's fun. It's interesting.
Right. That was you answered half my question, so that's great.
Okay.
So tell us about some of the other stuff you do that people may not be as aware of, right? What other kinds of cases and clients?
So we do a lot of whistleblower work, which I love. I've always loved the whistleblower cases because you get to represent an individual, and the individual has his or her own employment problem, but it's usually on something that really impacts the public. So public health and safety, waste, fraud, and abuse in the government. These are issues that are implicated by the whistleblowing. And so by representing them and helping them, you're also, again, working to affect change in an industry. So if you're talking about an environmental whistleblower or a nuclear whistleblower or transportation whistleblower. So for example, we represented a whistleblower from Boeing who blew the whistle on some of the 737 MAX safety issues. And he felt that he raised these issues and was retaliated against. So he had his own employment situation. But we also have a bigger issue here, right? The 737 MAX is not safe. Anyway, so we brought those issues to the attention, not only of Boeing, but to Congress. And ultimately there were hearings and Boeing was forced to ground the 737. There were other whistleblowers too. Our guy was not the only one, but so we were able to help him bring his concerns forward, address his personal situation, but also affect change, right? And to ensure that, again, Boeing has to answer, or whoever has to answer publicly for this issue. And it helps us all feel safer, when we're drinking water, going up in an airplane, turning on our lights, whatever it is. So it's another area that I really enjoy, and I feel like it makes an impact.
I just want to let the audience know that you've also written a very well-regarded textbook on this.
Yeah, we have a
My little
whistleblower treatise.
student here has
Yeah.
published the textbook.
So most recently, one of our most recent whistleblower cases is we represented Dr. Rick Bright, who is a former HHS scientist who blew the whistle on the Trump administration's failure to effectively address the COVID-19 pandemic, or to invest the millions of dollars that Congress had allotted to address it, and was putting politics over science and going after all these crazy ideas that were not scientifically vetted. So like hydroxychloroquine, and pushing that as some sort of panacea for the virus. So anyway, we pushed back on that again very publicly, because Dr. Bright had his own employment issue because he was marginalized. I mean, he is an expert in pandemic preparedness. He had prepared his whole life for this, and then it hits, and he says, "Hey, we need to put science over politics," and they tell him to go take a seat. And so he was pushed aside, and so we had to deal with his employment situation. But again, we also made it very public, and the Secretary of HHS and Trump and the others had to address that and answer for it. So I think that was, certainly an interesting, exciting, and important case for us.
Great. Any other cases you'd like to talk about?
Well, I know you want to hear about Title IX.
I do. I teach a class on Title IX, so this would be great. Yeah.
So we have done, quite a bit on Title IX, both with respect to sexual assault on campus, college campuses, as well as gender discrimination and retaliation with respect to coaches and other staff members at a school, or professors too. But so, for example, we had a case against the University of Mary Washington in Virginia, and that was a case dealing with cyber harassment, which was really interesting because a lot of harassment happens now online, and in that case, it was an anonymous app. So you couldn't tell who was posting it, and there was a feminist group on campus, and they were getting horrific threats, death threats, and other things. But a lot of cyber harassment. And so we pushed back against that and fought on behalf of this feminist group, and ended up getting a pretty great decision out of the Fourth Circuit, saying that universities have an obligation to look at cyber harassment as part of the problem and address it. They can't just say, well, it's cyber, we can't do anything about it. So that was really great in that respect. We had a case at the University of Colorado that we brought on behalf of a graduate student there based on sexual assault. And we worked with Colorado to resolve that case, but also in doing that, affected significant change at Colorado in the way that they handle these cases. And it was great because it was an example of a university saying, yes, we can do this better. There's a right way to do this. So let's sit down, roll up our sleeves, and figure it out and make these changes. And they did that. And I can tell you, I have other cases where the university does not do that. So that was one that stands out just because Colorado really did step up and try to do the right thing there. And then I've had a few cases dealing with discrimination and retaliation at a university, brought by professors, or more recently, coaches and staff in the athletics department. So it won't surprise anyone to know that women's programs in athletics and female coaches are discriminated against in the provision of resources. And then they're retaliated against when they complain about that discrimination. So we've had a number of cases like that. It's actually a big area of Title IX litigation right now across the country. Right now, I'm in the midst of a case against Georgia Tech on behalf of the former women's basketball coach who was fired after 16 successful years after she complained about gender equity issues. So we're in discovery in that case now, taking depositions, which you know, Rennie, because I kept missing our meetings.
No, you didn't. No, you didn't.
And so probably in trial in that case, probably in the winter. So so those are some of the cases that we're working on now in those areas.
Great. Really, really interesting, I think. I see, and, we could talk more about this, that these are discrete areas of the law, but there's a thread running through that's very clear. And I really thank you for, describing, the cases themselves, but also just letting everybody know what the areas of the law actually are, because, they are quite different, but there are definitely common themes and commonalities. So what I am going to do now is open the floor to the Q&A. And again, we ask that you submit your question using the Q&A function and not through the chat, because we're reserving the chat for you to talk to one another. And I do want to thank Lisa for that, how can I say, little workshop on all of the work you do in these important legal issues. And so I'm going to turn things back over to Steve for the moment. And I might have a question at the end, Steve, so you can come back to me too. And again, I just want to thank Lisa for that really lucid presentation.
Absolutely. Thank you both. So yes, folks, as Rennie said, please feel free to use the Q&A to submit live questions. There's a couple in the queue now. So we'll start with John Elwood. We'll say hi to John, who is an extremely loyal Trinity volunteer in Florida when he's not in Chicago. John asks, when there is not a settlement involved, how are you compensated?
Well, for some of my cases, we go to trial and ideally you win and you get paid that way. Some clients will pay hourly. So whether there's a settlement or a judgment, you get paid. And sometimes, and particularly in some of the more high profile ones, we do the case pro bono. So if it's an important public interest issue and we want to take it on, and it's somebody who can't afford to pay hourly and there's really no financial settlement in sight, we will often take these cases on a pro bono basis. And we're honestly very fortunate as a firm to be able to do that when we feel like we can and should. Great.
Kathleen Britton asks, a job interview question of sorts, where do you see yourself in 10 years?
Oh, I'm trying to figure out how old I am now. Well, I think I probably will be doing the same thing, maybe with a little more downtime to actually see my friends and family and spend some more time. And that includes Kathleen Britton, who's one of my friends.
Excellent. I'm not sure if this is a question or a comment or serious or not, so forgive me if I'm missing the point here, but I'll ask it. Marshall Garrison says, human versus robots, who wins? I'm not sure that we have enough there to go with, unless someone sees that differently than I do.
I don't know. I don't know what that has to do with anything, but I will say humans every day of the week.
All right, Marshall, if there's more there that we missed, feel free to add as well. Another question about the growth, or is there growth in the firm with high profile cases and more seemingly coming your way due to the work you guys are doing? Is the firm experiencing growth right now, and how are you managing that?
Yeah, I mean, I think with a civil rights firm, a plaintiff side civil rights firm, it's always a question, what is the right number? How big should you get? You're afraid of hiring on too many people and then not having enough work, but we have grown some, yes. Not tremendously. I think we're probably about 20 lawyers now, which for a plaintiff's firm that's not a class action firm, it's fairly large, but we've grown a little bit, but not too much, and we're able to pick and choose our cases, and so we manage our workloads appropriately. So yeah.
Okay. And an anonymous question. You mentioned earlier holding organizations and individuals to account for illegal behavior. And the questionnaire is curious about your confidence in the system generally. And you did say earlier you didn't want to sort of touch on politics too much. We've heard about the politicization of the judicial system, but the questionnaire is curious to know about your confidence in the system.
It's what we have. And, you know, the system works better when you shine a light on the wrongdoing. And so there can't be accountability without transparency. And that's why sometimes we are forced to bring this into public view. And so I think that the system generally works. You've got to push it and cajole it and massage it sometimes, but it works. And I think we make progress, but we make it incrementally. And you got to keep fighting and fighting back against the backlash and continuing to move things to a better place. But yeah, I mean, I think by and large, our systems and institutions work, but we really need to hold them accountable and hold their feet to the fire, because they're not going to happen by themselves.
Great, thank you. Marshall Garrison comes back to us with a little more clarity. Humans are being sidelined by robotics and automation. How will humans' employment rights be defended?
So there's a huge area of the law right now and a huge body of debate about artificial intelligence and employment. So companies, big corporations typically are using robotics and artificial intelligence to find candidates and make hiring and firing decisions. And it's a difficult area because it raises all sorts of issues regarding diversity and discrimination, because oftentimes those systems are based on biases that pre-existed and setting up the system in that way. And so there is going to be more of that in our workplaces, but people are approaching it warily, and there are going to be issues that we're going to have to grapple with about the impact of having so much AI in the workplace. I think it's inevitable. We're going to have it, but I don't think they're not going to replace human beings. But we do have issues with AI and the impact that can have, not only on the numbers and people's jobs and how many do you have, but how are those systems impacting how people get jobs, who gets jobs, and what happens to people. So I don't think humans are going to be replaced, but they're going to have to probably work side by side with some automation. And it's going to be a struggle to figure out how to do that most effectively.
Thank you. A couple more questions coming in. An anonymous attendee says, what advice would you give a student interested in working in civil rights or employment law?
Stay informed, stay active. I think I mentioned earlier that a lot of people put law school down. I actually loved law school. I found it incredibly interesting. A lot of people go to law school and they don't practice as a lawyer. And there are many, many things you can do with a law degree. So obviously, if you want to be a civil rights lawyer, you have to go to law school. But even if you want to be involved in these issues, there's policy work, think tanks, journalism. There's all sorts of ways that you can access these issues without being a lawyer. But I love being a lawyer. I'm glad I went to law school. I always encourage other people to do it as long as they're doing it because they're passionate about some aspect of the law and not just because they want to collect a paycheck at a big firm. And that's fine for some people. Some people are willing to do it, but that's a slog, and it's not, it's not necessarily somebody's passion. So, find what you're passionate about and find a job where you can do it.
Great. Elizabeth Guernsey asks, well, first she says, it looks like Rennie knows Elizabeth. First, Elizabeth says, thank you both for this presentation, and she means Rennie and Lisa, not me. How do you and your firm work with advocacy and policy groups that work on protecting whistleblowers and government accountability?
We have good relationships with organizations, actually mostly in DC, I guess, who support whistleblowers. And so we work with them on helping develop policy. They sometimes refer us cases. We sometimes bring them in to consult with us on cases. So we're very involved with policy shops who deal with whistleblowers, also women's groups too, the National Women's Law Center, groups like that. We work very closely with those types of groups. So that's kind of fun. So we get to do that too.
Great. Thanks, Elizabeth. Rennie, did you want to say hello to Elizabeth?
Hi, Elizabeth. Let me know when you're going to be back in Connecticut and we'll get together.
An anonymous attendee says, how, if at all, did the events of the pandemic impact your work in the legal world in general?
Well, for the last year and a half, we've been as busy as we've ever been. At the beginning of the pandemic, we were representing Dr. Bright, which obviously was pandemic related. So, there's that. So I was incredibly busy for the first several months of the pandemic, dealing with that issue. And we have not seen any sort of lag in work, which is not surprising, really. In a pandemic, people are struggling with jobs and work, and a lot of people lost their jobs, and a lot of issues happening. But it was during the pandemic that I was dealing with both the Dr. Bright case and the Washington football team case. So I was as busy as I have ever been, in addition to any number of individual clients that I'm representing.
And I assume that some of the legal system or proceedings, were those done virtually? Were there changes there?
Yeah. Well, the courts were doing some things virtually. We were doing virtual mediations. I'm currently doing depositions, and I'm doing them by Zoom. So everybody has learned to do this by Zoom. They have congressional hearings by Zoom, although the one hearing I have attended, I did do it in person, all masked up. But yeah, everything's happening by Zoom. The beginning was rough, particularly with respect to the courts, and they did shut down for a while. But everything's back up and running, and a lot of things now, just doing them by Zoom. And it'll be interesting, honestly, to see if it goes back, right? It may be that depositions continue to be done by Zoom. It's really convenient. You don't have to travel. You don't have to have a bunch of people sitting in the room. So, yeah.
Right. We may all remain in a hybrid world.
That's right.
An anonymous attendee says, this is a pretty broad question. What do you envision being key issues in the future of civil rights and employment law? Are there issues on the horizon that those of us outside of the industry might not have front of mind?
Wow, that's a really great question. I wish I had that. I wish I had that crystal ball. Unfortunately, the more things change, the more they stay the same. We're still going to have issues around race. I think what we saw this summer made that very, very clear. This is still an issue that we grapple with, that we need to figure out a better way to deal with. So I don't think those are going to stop. I think the Me Too movement was truly a movement and not just a moment. And I think we are the way women are treated in the workplace and outside of the workplace, people are looking at it fundamentally different. I think there has been a fundamental shift, but that's going to continue to move. I think voting rights is probably going to be, it's not something I work on specifically. I wish I did some days, but I think that that's going to be enormous going forward in our country. So, our issues related to DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, that's going to continue. I think if I had to pick one aspect that's really going to be a focus of the civil rights community, I would say voting. Voting is probably where we're headed.
Right. Thank you. Another, it could be the same anonymous attendee, but says, how did your time at Trinity prepare you for the work you do? And I'll add my own curiosity to that, is just a little bit about what your academic and extracurricular interests, or what life was like for you as a student at Trinity.
Well, one of the great things about Trinity is it's so small, right? And so I got the opportunity to know a professor like Rennie Falco, and she had the opportunity to know me. And but for her support and encouragement, I honestly don't think that I would have done any of what I had done, because I don't think I would have had the confidence to go to law school, to do some of the things that I did. And she's been a champion throughout. And so I think that's something that, was unique to Trinity, in that we have such a great student faculty ratio, and you're able to really connect with professors in a way that maybe you can't at a larger school. My life at Trinity, well, I played a lot of sports at Trinity. So that was a lot of fun, and maybe took away too much time from my studies, but I think it was important to be well-rounded, and had a great group of friends at Trinity. We're still friends to this day, and I think a couple of them are probably attending this event. And all around, it was a really fabulous time in my life, because I felt like I got an incredibly great education, met some really wonderful people, and was able to move on and have confidence that I could be successful in my future.
Great. It doesn't look like that balance of sports and academics held you back at all. Ellen Hart, a colleague of Rennie's and mine, who has a master's degree in public policy from Trinity as well, asks, do you foresee any litigation or work coming out of the way that the pandemic has affected women?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. So I think what Ellen's referring to is that women, by and large, have been forced to deal with the childcare issues. And it's been really hard, particularly for women with small children, to go back to the workplace, or to even conduct their job via Zoom if they're even able to. But a lot of people are not fortunate enough to have a job where they can sit at home and do it by Zoom. They have to actually go in. But they also have kids that are out of school. And so the brunt of this, unfortunately, fell mostly on women. And because women could not show up and do their job, they got fired. And so it's a real issue. I don't know that it's a legal issue, Ellen. Like, I don't know that there is a claim there, because obviously if you run a grocery store, you need your cashier to show up, and they can't do that from home. I think it's going to be more of a political or policy fix than a legal fix. But it certainly has revealed a fundamental problem we have in this country with childcare and work.
And Ellen wrote back to say, yes, that's exactly what she's referring to. So good call.
Yeah.
That's the last of the live questions in the queue right now. We've got a little more time, so feel free to ask more questions. But in the meantime, maybe Rennie has a few more things she wanted to add.
Yeah, so here's my exam question, kind of question.
Oh, no.
No, just something that when I'm thinking about this thread that runs through everything, that you do, it's employment. There was a time when we didn't have employment law like this, right? And, I know from teaching about Title VII, that certainly nobody thought at that time that the law that was being written was necessarily, anti-discrimination law, right? Was going to have the kind of impact that it had. And so what I'm thinking about is how in these different areas of the law, and not all of it goes to Title VII, I mean, there's Title IX, but in a way, because there's federal oversight of employment, right? There are laws that regulate employment in this country, not always everybody doesn't obey, but the laws are there. Maybe you could just say something about the importance of having that kind of legislation, that allows people like you to be able to go to court and represent, individuals or groups of individuals on all of these important issues, because we're in a moment where it's hard for Congress to legislate, right? Where we have this stalemate. And, the Democrats right now would like to update employment law, right? To give greater protections to LGBTQ individuals, right? So maybe you could just say something about that relationship between the laws themselves and the work you do, right? And maybe the significance of having laws that allow you to do the work you do.
Well, I think, if we don't have those laws, then you're back to where we were in the 1950s. I think the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964. I can't even imagine that a law like that could get passed today for so many reasons. But we can't pass anything right now, never mind major civil rights legislation. I mean, some people say that it wouldn't have been passed then, but for Kennedy's assassination. But in any event, there have to be guardrails in place to regulate what employers are able to do and not do. And that's what Title VII and some of the other laws did. Prior to Title VII, obviously, anybody could be fired for any reason, no reason at all, and nothing was illegal. We still have that case, however, with LGBT community, right? So if somebody in most states or many states, unless there's a state law that protects someone, you can walk into somebody's office and say, I had no idea you were gay, you're fired. And there's no federal law that protects against that. Well, the Supreme Court had to say that sex discrimination includes discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, which is not obvious, all right? That was not a given. And it should be easy to amend Title VII and add in sexual orientation, but that's just never going to happen. You see what happens when laws like the Voting Rights Act is gutted or stripped. There are no guardrails, and chaos ensues. And so it's really, really important to say, for federal legislation to say, this is what we believe as a society is the right way to treat our workers, to treat other people. And we need to be able to update those laws to keep up with where we are as a society. The Title VII still has these caps on damages, where for the largest corporations, the maximum amount of damages you can get for compensatory and punitive damages is $300,000. Now, can you imagine how much of a deterrent that is for something like Amazon? Not much. So we've been saying for years that they need to adjust those caps. So the laws need to be updated. They can't be gutted. We need to have more. And so I think it's incredibly important, certainly to what I do, but it's more important to people who go to work every day and are protected by those laws.
Good. Thank you very much. I think it's nice to be able to connect the two sides here, right? Because without those laws, you couldn't do what you do. And what you're saying is those laws really need to be updated because they are not comprehensive enough at this time. And so, when I speak to students, sometimes, they think about what they might do. And I think, doing this kind of work, for example, getting elected and doing this kind of work, or becoming an advocate, even if you're not a lawyer, but you work for an advocacy group or a think tank, it's another way I think that students can become involved who care about these issues. So
right, because if we don't protect those laws, they're going to go away, just like the Voting Rights Act, right? So I do believe that's going to be the issue of the future, and we're going to have to fight to protect whatever laws exist and to keep these draconian laws from being put in place. And so we need lots of people to go out and do good work to protect our democracy. And now I am getting political, so I'm going to stop.
All right, but that's okay, because I mean, that's what civil rights is about.
Right.
Right. I mean, civil rights is not an end in itself, right? I mean, civil rights, what you're saying is civil rights, and I don't think this is political. I think this is just, you know, how it is. If you believe in democracy,
Right.
you know, a part of maintaining a democracy is making sure that the rule of law is upheld. And part of upholding the rule of law is upholding the rights of individuals under the law. And so it is ultimately about democracy. And, you know, civil rights is a pillar of that. You know, the reason a lot of this derives from I mean, this is, you know, not just making this up. This is, you know, it derives from the Constitution itself. So I think we're on the same page with that. I think it's really important to remind people, you know, that the work that you do, right, ultimately is in service of that larger goal.
I hope so. I
Yeah.
hope so.
Yeah, well, I think so. So I'm going to give you an A for that assignment. So I think. Any other questions, Steve, you think?
No, it looks like it's almost 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, so people are probably starting to check out. I'll let you, Rennie and Lisa, finish and close with any comments or questions you guys would like to make of each other.
Sure. I just want to thank Lisa from the bottom of my heart. I just am so incredibly proud and, you know, touched by her comments today. Some are personal, right? But just also amazingly impressed with what she's accomplished. And it's wonderful. It's just wonderful to be able to do this.
Thank you. Thank you, Rennie. I appreciate it. And, you know, having a teacher, a mentor like you really is invaluable. So to the students that are out there, you know, find your mentor, find your guide, and hold on tight, because it truly is important.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both. Lisa, thanks for putting off your reunion for a year. Congratulations. And thanks everybody for joining us today.